Michael Hudson opened his front door and heard sounds coming from upstairs. Strange sounds, voices he didn't recognize. His heart started racing. No one should be in his house making noise like that. He ran upstairs, afraid of what he'd find. And when he looked through the nursery door, he couldn't believe what he was seeing. His 4 children, silent for over a year, were speaking, actually speaking, and what they said next would change his life forever. Michael pulled into his driveway at 4:47 that afternoon, early. The merger collapsed. He was exhausted, tie loose, jacket off, just wanting to get inside and forget this day happened. He opened the front door and froze. He heard voices upstairs, loud, unfamiliar. His chest tightened. Who was in his house? What was happening? Then he heard something that made his blood run cold. Laughter, children laughing. But that was impossible. His children didn't laugh. They didn't make sounds. They hadn't spoken since their mother died 13 months ago. Michael dropped his briefcase and ran, his heart pounding, his mind racing. He took the stairs 2 at a time, following those sounds, terrified and confused and not understanding what he was hearing. When he reached the nursery door, he stopped. Clara, the new nanny, was on the floor with his 4 children, and they were alive, really alive. Smiling, reaching for her, eyes bright with joy. And then his smallest son, Elliot, looked at Clara and said, "Clara." Michael's legs almost gave out. Emerson said it next, "Clara." Then Eden and Emery together, "Clara, Clara." His children were speaking, his babies who doctors said would never talk again, who'd been silent since the funeral, since they lost their mother and the world went quiet. They were speaking, but not to him. Clara turned and saw him standing there, and the look on his face must have told her everything. Shock, devastation, something breaking inside him that he didn't know how to fix. Before we begin, like this video, subscribe, and tell me where in the world you're watching from. Sometimes the miracles we've been praying for arrive in ways we never expected, through people we almost overlooked. The next morning, Michael woke up at 5:30 like always, showered, put on a suit, went through the motions of being the man he used to be. But his hands shook while he buttoned his shirt. He kept hearing it, that sound, his children's voices, clear and bright and full of life, saying her name. He needed answers. By 7:15, he was sitting in his office, waiting. He'd sent a message to Clara the night before. "My office, 7:30, we need to talk." When she knocked on the door, he didn't look up right away, just kept staring at the papers on his desk like they mattered, like he was in control. "Come in." Clara stepped inside. She was wearing jeans and a sweater, no makeup, hair pulled back. She looked young, too young to have done what she'd done. Michael gestured to the chair across from him. "Sit." She sat. He looked at her then, really looked at her, and the question came out harsher than he meant it to. "What did you do to my children?" Clara didn't flinch. She just held his gaze, calm, steady. And that calmness made something twist in his chest. "I gave them attention, Mr. Hudson." Michael's jaw tightened. "Attention." "Yes." He leaned forward, his voice rising despite himself. "I pay for pediatric specialists, speech therapists, behavioral neurologists. The best doctors in Boston examined them. They said my children would never speak again, that the trauma was too deep, that we'd missed the window." Clara crossed her arms. Not defensive, just present. "They said that to you, because you asked them about neurology, about therapy protocols, about treatment plans." Michael felt heat rising in his chest. "What else was I supposed to ask?" "Nothing." Clara's voice stayed even. "You did what you thought was right. But those doctors, they answered the questions you gave them. They looked at scans and charts and developmental milestones." She leaned forward slightly. "Your children said my name because I look them in the eyes when I talk to them, because I sing to them, because I hold them when they're scared, because I'm there, really there, not managing them, just being with them." The word hit him like a punch. There. "Mr. Hudson, it's not about the money you spend or the treatment plan you follow. It's about showing up, being present, letting them know they're not alone." Michael felt anger and shame colliding in his chest. She was right. He knew she was right, but admitting it felt like admitting he'd failed. Failed Sophia, failed his children, failed at the one thing that actually mattered. "You don't understand," he said, his voice tight. "I've given them everything, safety, stability, the best of everything." "I know you have," Clara said gently, "but they don't need the best of everything. They need you." Silence filled the room, heavy and uncomfortable. Then Clara said the words that would haunt him for days. "Your children don't need another specialist, Mr. Hudson. They need their father, and I'm not their mother. I could never be. But until you come back to them, someone has to show up." Michael's throat felt tight. He wanted to argue, to defend himself, to explain that he'd been doing his best, that losing Sophia had destroyed him, that he didn't know how to be what they needed. But all he said was, "That's all. You can go." Clara stood, paused at the door. "They're waiting for you, Mr. Hudson. They've been waiting this whole time." Then she left. Michael sat alone in his office, the same office where he'd closed million-dollar deals without breaking a sweat, where he'd negotiated mergers and fired executives and built an empire. And he'd never felt smaller. That night, he couldn't sleep. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying that moment. His children's faces, their voices, the way they'd reached for Clara like she was everything. He realized something that made his chest ache. He didn't know what Elliot's voice sounded like when he was happy. He didn't know which songs made Emerson smile. He didn't know if Eden liked to be held or if Emery was scared of the dark. He knew their medical files, their therapy schedules, their dietary restrictions, but he didn't know them. And they didn't know him, not anymore. Over the next few days, Michael started noticing things he'd never paid attention to before. The curtains in the nursery were open. Sunlight poured through the windows, bright and warm. He couldn't remember the last time he'd seen light in that room. He'd kept everything dim, controlled, safe. But now the light was there, and it changed everything. He noticed toys scattered across the floor, not organized in bins like he'd ordered, just everywhere. Building blocks by the window, stuffed animals on the rug, crayons and paper spread out on the small table. It looked messy. It looked alive. One afternoon, he came home and heard music coming from the kitchen, soft, folksy, something with a guitar. He stood in the doorway and watched Clara humming while she made lunch. And the children, his children, were dancing. Not really dancing, just swaying, moving their little bodies to the rhythm. Emerson spun in a circle. Eden clapped her hands. Elliot bobbed his head. Michael's chest tightened. He'd forgotten they could move like that, free, unafraid. That night, he sat in his car in the driveway for 20 minutes. He pulled up the nanny cam on his phone and watched. Clara was reading to them, some picture book about a bear in a forest. The children sat close to her. Emery had his head on her shoulder. Eden was holding her hand. Elliot kept pointing at the pictures, and Clara would pause and talk about what he was seeing. Michael watched the whole thing, and when it was over, he couldn't bring himself to go inside. He felt like he'd be interrupting something sacred, something he didn't belong to. A few days later, he found a journal on the kitchen counter. It was open. Clara's handwriting covered the pages, small and neat. He knew he shouldn't read it, but he did anyway. Today, Emerson touched my cheek and smiled, really smiled, like she was trying to tell me something she didn't have words for yet. Elliot said up this afternoon, his first word beyond my name. He wanted to be held, so I held him. For a long time. They're learning it's safe to want things, to ask for things, to reach out and trust that someone will be there. Michael closed the journal and sat down at the table. His hands were shaking. She'd been documenting everything, every breakthrough, every moment, all the things he should have been there to see. Life had been happening. His children had been healing, growing, coming back to themselves, and he'd missed it all. He thought about Sophia, wondered what she would say if she could see what he'd done, what he'd turned their home into. He knew she'd be disappointed. She was always the warm one, the one who got on the floor and played, who sang too loud and laughed too much and made their house feel like a home. He was the planner, the problem solver. The one who thought he could control everything if he just worked hard enough, if he just had the right strategy. But there was no strategy for grief, no plan that could bring back what he'd lost. He sat there in the kitchen for a long time, the house quiet around him, and for the first time in over a year, he thought about walking upstairs, opening the nursery door, sitting down on that floor where his children played. He thought about it, but he didn't move. Not yet. Dr. Richard Sterling arrived on a Thursday morning. Michael had called him for a follow-up assessment. He needed someone with credentials to explain what was happening, to make sense of the impossible. Dr. Sterling was one of the top neurologists at Yale, expensive, confident, the kind of doctor who spoke in terms Michael understood, data, prognosis, clinical outcomes. They sat in Michael's office while the doctor reviewed his notes. "I've looked at the reports you sent, the vocalizations your children made." "They're speaking," Michael said. "Not vocalizations, words." Dr. Sterling adjusted his glasses. "Michael, I need you to manage your expectations. Selective mutism doesn't resolve in 3 weeks. What you witnessed was likely reflexive. Echolalia, perhaps. They may have repeated a sound they heard frequently. But sustained speech patterns?" He shook his head. "The neural pathways simply aren't there." Michael felt frustration rising. "I heard them, clear as anything." "I'm sure you did. But one isolated incident doesn't indicate recovery. The trauma your children experienced, losing their mother at such a formative age, it's profound, permanent in many cases." Before Michael could respond, the door opened. Clara walked in with the Quadruplets. She had that gentle look on her face. "I'm sorry to interrupt. The children wanted to say good morning." Dr. Sterling glanced at them briefly. Professional, detached. And then Clara started singing. Soft, slow. A melody that made the air in the room change. Michael's entire body went rigid. He knew that song. His chest felt like it was being crushed, ice spreading through his veins. That was Sophia's song. The lullaby she'd created when the babies were in the NICU, when they were so small and fragile, hooked up to machines, and she'd sing to them every single night. She'd made up verses about each child, about their strength, about how much she loved them. Michael had never told anyone about that song. He'd never spoken the words out loud after she died, never hummed the melody. He couldn't. It hurt too much. He looked at Clara, confusion, and something like fear in his eyes. "How do you know that song?" Clara stopped singing, reached into her pocket and pulled out a phone. Old, cracked screen, one he recognized. "I found this in your wife's vanity drawer, the bottom one." It was locked. The key was in her jewelry box. She handed it to him. Michael's hands trembled as he took it. Sophia's phone. He'd forgotten it existed. Couldn't bring himself to look at it after she died. "There are recordings," Clara said softly. "Voice memos, dozens of them." Michael stared at the screen, scrolled through with numb fingers. "NICU Day 23, song for my babies. Week 32, reading to my belly. For Michael, if I'm not there." His throat closed up. Dr. Sterling cleared his throat. "Perhaps I should leave," Michael said, his voice barely there. "Please, I need privacy." Clara quietly ushered the doctor out, took the children with her, closed the door behind them. Michael was alone. He sat there staring at that last recording. For Michael, if I'm not there. His finger hovered over it. He hadn't heard Sophia's voice since the funeral, had avoided every video, every voicemail, every trace of her because the pain was too much. But now, sitting in his office with her phone in his hands, he pressed play, and Sophia's voice filled the room, tired, soft, fierce with love. "Michael, if you're hearing this, I'm gone." He closed his eyes, tears already streaming down his face. "I know you, baby. I know you'll try to control everything so the pain can't touch you. That's who you've always been. You think if you can manage every variable, you can prevent disaster." Her voice cracked slightly. "But you can't schedule grief, my love. You can't optimize your way through loss. Let our babies be messy, let them be loud, let them make mistakes and skin their knees and cry when they're sad. Let them live. Michael's chest heaved. I don't want them growing up in a museum. I want them growing up in a home, a chaotic, loving, present mess. Promise me you won't turn our house into a tomb just because I'm not in it anymore. The recording ended. Michael sat on the floor, the same floor where he'd closed billion-dollar deals, where he'd built an empire. And he broke, really broke. For the first time since Sophia died, he let himself feel everything he'd been running from. And the sound that came out of him was raw and broken and real. 3 days after listening to Sophia's recording, Michael found Clara in the kitchen. His eyes were still red. He hadn't slept much, but something inside him had shifted. Take them outside, he said quietly. Clara looked up, surprised. Outside? The garden. Take them to the garden. The backyard had been off-limits since Sophia died. Michael had hired people to keep it maintained, the grass cut, the flowers trimmed, everything perfect. But no one actually used it. It was just another beautiful empty space. Clara studied his face for a moment, then nodded. Okay. That afternoon, Michael stood at his office window and watched. Clara opened the back door and led the children outside. They stepped onto the porch slowly, cautious, like they weren't sure they were allowed. Then Emerson took off her shoes, just slipped them off and stepped onto the grass, barefoot. Michael's breath caught. She bent down and touched it, ran her small fingers through the blades. Then she looked up at Clara and smiled. Elliot followed. Then Eden. Then Emery. All four of them barefoot on the grass, touching it like it was the most amazing thing they'd ever felt. Elliot found a ladybug on a leaf and shouted, a real shout, loud and pure and full of wonder. Eden picked up a smooth stone and held it like treasure. Emery chased a butterfly across the yard, stumbled, fell on his bottom, and instead of crying, he laughed, got up, kept running. Michael pressed his hand against the window, his chest aching. He remembered Sophia was always the one who encouraged mess, who let them explore, who said children need dirt under their fingernails and grass stains on their clothes. He was always the one worried about safety, about keeping everything clean and controlled. And now, watching his children discover the world like it was brand new, he realized what he'd taken from them, what he'd taken from himself. Clara sat on the grass and let them bring her things, rocks, leaves, dandelions. She held each one like it mattered, like their joy mattered. That evening, Michael went downstairs to get water, and there, stuck to the refrigerator, was a note in Clara's handwriting. Today they touched the earth. Today they reached the world. He stood there reading it over and over. Then, he sat down on the kitchen floor, right there in his suit that cost more than most people made in a month. And he cried. Not the raw, broken sobs from 3 days ago. This was different. Quieter. Deeper. He cried for the year he'd lost, for the moments he'd never get back, for every time he'd chosen control over presents, every time he'd walked past their room instead of going in, every morning he'd left before they woke up because it was easier than facing them. He cried for Sophia, for the man he used to be, for the father he should have been. 20 minutes later, Clara found him there. She didn't say anything, just sat down next to him on the floor, handed him tissues from the counter, stayed. Finally, Michael managed to speak, his voice rough. I don't know how to do this, how to be what they need. Clara's voice was gentle. You don't have to know. You just have to show up. They'll teach you the rest. That night, Michael stood outside the nursery door, his hand on the handle, heart pounding. He could hear Clara inside doing the bedtime routine, singing softly, the children making small sounds, content, safe. He wanted to go in. God, he wanted to. But his hand wouldn't turn the handle, not yet. The next evening, Michael came home at 6 instead of 9. He stood in the foyer holding his briefcase, listening. Upstairs, he could hear bath time happening, water running, Clara's voice soft and playful, the children laughing. He set down his briefcase, loosened his tie, and before he could talk himself out of it, he climbed the stairs. The bathroom door was open. Steam drifted into the hallway. He stopped just outside and watched. Clara had all 4 children in the tub, bubbles everywhere. Elliot was trying to make a beard out of foam. Emery was pouring water from a cup. Eden and Emerson were giggling at something only they understood. Clara looked up and saw him. Their eyes met. She didn't say anything, just gave him a small nod, then turned back to the children. "Okay, my loves, time to get out and get cozy." She wrapped each one in a towel, dried their hair, helped them into pajamas, and the whole time, Michael just stood there, watching, not knowing what to do with his hands. When they were dressed, Clara guided them toward the nursery. Michael followed, his heart hammering in his chest. Clara sat on the floor with them, started their bedtime routine, a song, a story, the same rhythm she did every night. Then she looked at Michael. "Would you like to help tonight?" Michael's throat went dry. The children looked at him, uncertain, like they weren't sure who he was or why he was there. He wanted to run. Every instinct screamed at him to leave, to go back to his office where he knew what he was doing. But he thought about Sophia's voice. Show up. Be present. Let them be loved. "Yes," he said quietly. "I'd like that." Clara smiled. "Emerson loves being read to. Would you read to her?" Michael nodded, walked over slowly, sat down on the floor, his expensive suit wrinkling against the rug. Emerson watched him, her big eyes studying his face like she was trying to decide if he was safe. Clara handed him a book, something about a caterpillar. Michael opened it, started reading, his voice shaky at first, but as he read, Emerson inched closer. Just a little, then a little more. By the 3rd page, she was leaning against his side. Michael's voice cracked. He had to pause, swallow hard, keep going. When he finished, Emerson reached up and touched his face, her small hand on his cheek. "Daddy," she whispered. That one word undid him. Elliot climbed into his lap without asking, just crawled over and sat there. Emery brought him another book. "Read." Eden simply leaned against his other side. Michael looked at Clara, his eyes wet. She was smiling, not triumphant, just glad. "You're doing great," she mouthed. He read 3 more books, his arms around his children, their warm little bodies pressed against him, and for the first time in 13 months, he felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. When it was time for bed, he helped tuck them in, kissed each forehead, something he hadn't done since Sophia died. "Good night, my loves," he whispered. "Night, Daddy," Elliot said sleepily. Michael stood in the doorway with Clara, watching them settle, watching them feel safe. "Thank you," he said. Clara shook her head. "You did that, not me." But they both knew the truth. She'd opened the door. He'd finally walked through it. 2 weeks later, Michael was working late in his office, the house quiet around him. He'd been spending more time with the children, coming home earlier, doing bedtime routines, learning their rhythms, but tonight he'd gotten pulled back into a deal, lost track of time. Around 9, he heard Clara's voice through the baby monitor he'd forgotten to turn off. She was doing bedtime, talking to the children softly. He should have turned it off, given her privacy. But something made him listen. "Your mama was the most incredible person," Clara was saying. "She loved you more than anything in the world, more than the sun and the moon and all the stars." Michael's hand stilled on his keyboard. "I know she's watching you grow up. I know she sees every smile, every new word. She's so proud of you." The children were quiet, listening. Then Clara said something that made Michael's chest tighten. "I'm not her, my sweet babies. I could never be her. But I love you too. So much." Michael stood up, his jaw clenched, something dark and complicated rising in his chest, possessive, territorial, afraid. She was crossing a line. He walked upstairs, each step deliberate. When he reached the nursery, the children were already asleep. Clara was collecting toys, putting them in the basket. "Clara, a word, now!" His voice was cold, controlled. She looked up, confused, followed him into the hallway. Michael kept his voice low so the children wouldn't hear, but his hands were shaking. "You're crossing a line. They have a mother. They had a mother." Clara's face softened. "I know that. I honor that every single day." "Do you?" Michael's voice rose slightly. "Because what I just heard didn't sound like honoring anything. It sounded like you're trying to replace her." "That's not what I'm doing." Clara's voice stayed calm, steady. "But you need to understand something, Mr. Hudson. You can take your place back anytime you want. You just have to want to." "I am taking my place back," Michael said through his teeth. "I've been here. I've been trying." "I know, and that's beautiful. But loving them doesn't mean I'm replacing their mother. It means I'm showing up. Someone has to." "You don't get to decide that." Michael felt exposed, raw. "You don't get to tell me how to be a father to my children." Clara took a breath. "You're right. I don't. But they need a present father, not a rich man who's terrified of his own grief." The words landed like a punch. Michael felt everything inside him snap. "You've crossed the line for the last time. Pack your things. You're done here." Clara's face showed hurt, real hurt, but she stayed dignified. "Okay, I'll say goodbye to them in the morning." "No," Michael's voice was final. "Leave tonight. I'll handle it." "Mr. Hudson, I said leave." Clara grabbed her bag from the closet, paused at the top of the stairs. "They're going to hurt, and you're going to have to be the one who holds them through it. I hope you're ready." Then she left. Michael stood in the hallway, breathing hard, telling himself he'd done the right thing, set boundaries, protected his family. But around 2 a.m, he heard it. Crying, all 4 children waking up, calling out, "Clara! Clara! Want Clara!" Michael went to the nursery, tried to comfort them. "It's okay, Daddy's here." But they pushed him away, crying harder. "Clara! Where's Clara?" He tried singing, reading, holding them. Nothing worked. They cried for her. The first real tears they'd cried since the funeral. The first time they'd wanted something so much they couldn't hold it in. By 4 a.m, all 4 were exhausted, hiccuping, falling asleep from sheer emotional exhaustion. Michael sat on the floor surrounded by their cribs, covered in their tears and his own. And he understood. He didn't fire Clara because she crossed a line. He fired her because she made him see how absent he'd been, how much his children needed, how terrified he was of not being enough. He'd pushed away the only person who brought life back into this house, and his children were paying the price. Michael didn't sleep. By 6 a.m, he was already in his car, still wearing yesterday's clothes, hair uncombed, eyes red. He'd tracked down Clara's address, a small apartment in New Haven, near the university, 25 minutes away. He knocked on her door at 7:15. She opened it slowly, surprised. She was wearing Yale sweatpants and an old hoodie. Her eyes were red, too. She'd been crying. Michael in his wrinkled suit had never felt smaller. "I was wrong," he said, his voice barely working. "Please, come back." Clara didn't answer right away, just looked at him, really looked at him. "Why?" she finally asked. "So you can fire me again the next time I love them too much?" Michael shook his head. "Because they need you. Because He swallowed hard. "Because I need help. I don't know how to do this." Clara leaned against the door frame. "I'll come back, but not for you, Mr. Hudson. For them. I understand. And not under the same terms." Michael waited. "If I come back, you come back too. To your children. To your life. I can't be the only one showing up anymore." "Okay. And you call me Clara, not the nanny, not Miss Martin. Clara. Because I'm a person who loves those children, and you don't get to diminish that." Michael nodded. "Okay, Clara," she grabbed her keys. "Let's go." When they walked through the front door, the house felt different. Cold. Wrong. The children were awake, subdued. Mrs. Chen, the housekeeper, looked exhausted. The moment the children saw Clara, everything changed. They ran, all four of them, crying and reaching and holding onto her like she was air itself. "Clara! Clara back!" She knelt down and wrapped her arms around all of them. I'm here, my loves. I'm not going anywhere." Over their heads she looked at Michael, mouthed two words. "Your turn." That afternoon, Michael cleared his entire schedule, canceled meetings, turned off his phone, sat on the nursery floor. Clara guided him gently. "Let them come to you. Don't force it. Just be here." At first, the children kept their distance, stayed close to Clara, watched him like they weren't sure yet. But slowly, so slowly, Emerson approached, touched his hand. Elliot climbed into his lap, sat there without saying anything. Emery brought him a toy truck. "Play?" Eden leaned against his side. Michael's hands shook as he picked up the truck, started pushing it across the floor, making engine sounds that felt ridiculous and perfect. The children watched, then joined in, then laughed. Over the next few weeks, everything changed. Michael worked from home 3 days a week, did breakfast every morning, learned that Emerson hated carrots, that Elliot needed 2 goodnight hugs, never one, that Eden liked being sung to, that Emery needed to run around before bed, or he'd never settle. He learned their sounds, their rhythms. The way Elliot's laugh was different from Emery's. The way Emerson got quiet when she was thinking. The way Eden held onto his hand a little tighter when she was scared. He was learning his children, and they were learning him. One evening he found Clara in the kitchen making dinner. He stood in the doorway. "Thank you," he said, "for not giving up on us." Clara turned. "I didn't do this for gratitude, Michael. I did it because they deserved someone to show up." "I know, but I'm saying it anyway." She smiled, small, real. "You're welcome." And for the first time in over a year, Michael felt like maybe, just maybe, they were going to be okay. 2 months after Clara returned, Michael started noticing something. She'd been quieter than usual, distracted during bedtime routines. Sometimes he'd find her staring out the window, lost in thought. One night, he came downstairs for water around midnight and found her sitting at the kitchen table, crying softly. There was a letter in front of her, official-looking, Columbia University letterhead. His heart sank. "You got in," he said quietly. Clara looked up, wiped her eyes quickly. "Yeah, I got in." Michael sat down across from her, read the header upside down. Pediatric Behavioral Health Fellowship, full funding. Research Lab Clinical Rotations, the best faculty in the country for childhood trauma. Her voice cracked. "It's everything I worked for before my mom got sick, before I had to put everything on hold." "That's incredible, Clara. You should be celebrating." She laughed, but it came out broken. "I know I should. I know it's the opportunity of a lifetime. But when I think about telling them I'm leaving." She couldn't finish. Michael saw the letter was covered in notes, pros and cons lists, crossed out, rewritten, crossed out again. He took a breath, made a decision that surprised even himself. "What if you didn't have to choose?" Clara looked up, confused. "What if you took the fellowship and we restructured everything here? Hired someone for mornings when you have classes, adjusted schedules around your clinical rotations. You could still do bedtimes most nights, still be here on weekends." "Michael, that's not realistic. That's not what you hired me for." "You're right. I didn't hire you to save my family either, but here we are." He leaned forward. "You gave me my children back, Clara. You gave me myself back. You think I'm going to let you disappear from our lives just because you're pursuing your dreams? This is crazy. You don't restructure your entire life around the Nanny's graduate school." "You're right, but you do it for family." He paused. "And that's what you are." Clara stared at him, tears streaming down her face now. "Family? The children love you. He struggled with the words. "I'm grateful for you. Every single day. You're not just someone who works here anymore. You're part of this." Clara was quiet for a long moment, then she slid something across the table. A drawing. crayon on construction paper. Eden had made it that afternoon. 5 stick figures, 4 small ones in bright colors, 1 tall one labeled Dada in shaky letters, and 1 labeled Clara, all of them holding hands in a line, big smiles drawn on their faces. At the bottom, Eden had written in her messy handwriting, "Our family." "They already know," Clara whispered. "Somehow they already know what we are." Michael touched the drawing gently. "So what do you say? Want to try doing this messy, complicated thing together?" Clara looked at the letter, at the drawing, at Michael. "Okay," she said. "We'll figure it out. Together." They didn't shake hands, didn't sign anything formal, but it felt bigger than any contract Michael had ever negotiated. It felt like the moment a family chose itself. The next morning, Clara told the children she'd be going to school some mornings, that she'd still be there for bedtimes and weekends, that she wasn't leaving. Elliot looked worried. "You come back?" "Always," Clara promised. "I always come back." Emerson hugged her tight. "Love you, Clara." "I love you too, sweetheart." And Michael, watching from the doorway, felt something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. Real hope that maybe they could actually do this. Build something new from the broken pieces. Something that honored Sophia's memory, but also made space for life to grow again. That night, after the children were asleep, Michael sat in his office. The same office where he used to hide from his life. But now it felt different. The door was open. He could hear Clara studying in the living room, could hear the house breathing around him. He looked at the framed photo on his desk. Sophia holding the babies in the hospital. Her smile tired but radiant. "Thank you," he whispered, "for sending her, for not letting me stay lost." And somewhere deep in his heart, he felt something like peace beginning to take root. 4 months later, the house sounded completely different. There was music playing on a Sunday afternoon, some children's song about wheels on a bus, the kind that gets stuck in your head for days. Michael used to hate songs like that. Now he found himself humming them in the shower. Toys were everywhere, building blocks in the living room, crayons on the kitchen table, stuffed animals on the stairs. The kind of mess that meant children actually lived there. The refrigerator was covered in drawings, magnetic letters spelling words the children were learning, finger paintings that Clara said were masterpieces, even though they just looked like colorful blobs. It looked like a home. It felt like a home. Michael worked from his office upstairs now, door open, so he could hear everything. The laughter, the running footsteps, Clara's voice reading stories, the sounds of life happening around him. He did breakfast every morning, knew who wanted pancakes and who wanted waffles, who liked syrup and who didn't. He did bedtime 3 nights a week. Clara handled the other 4 around her classes at Columbia. He knew things now, real things. That Elliot was scared of thunderstorms, that Emery needed his blue blanket to sleep, that Eden talked more in the mornings when she was fresh, that Emerson was the quiet one who noticed everything and felt everything deep. He knew his children, and they knew him. That Sunday afternoon, all 6 of them were in the backyard. Michael had installed a swing set, nothing fancy, just sturdy and safe and big enough for all 4 children. He was pushing them, one at a time, higher and higher while they shrieked with joy. Clara was spreading out a blanket for a picnic, sandwiches cut into triangles, apple slices, juice boxes, simple things that somehow felt sacred. "Higher, Daddy, higher!" Emerson called out, her voice bright and fearless. That word still did something to Michael's chest, every single time, that beautiful ache that was somehow both painful and perfect. "Clara, watch me, watch!" Elliot shouted. Clara turned, gave him her full attention. "I'm watching, baby, you're flying!" The children were loud, messy, fully alive. Michael caught Clara's eye across the yard. She smiled at him, that gentle smile that said everything without words. He smiled back. Because they'd become something he never expected. A team, a unit, a family that didn't look like what he'd planned, but somehow worked anyway. Later, After they'd eaten and the children were playing in the grass, Clara sat next to Michael on the blanket. "You're doing really well," she said quietly. "We're doing well," he corrected. She bumped his shoulder gently. "Yeah, we are." Eden ran over with a dandelion, the fluffy kind ready to blow. "Make wish, Daddy." Michael took it carefully, looked at his daughter's expectant face. "What should I wish for?" Eden thought seriously, tilted her head. "Wish for happy." Michael looked around, at his 4 children covered in grass stains and juice, at Clara folding napkins and humming, at the sun filtering through the trees in the backyard that had been empty for so long, at the life they'd built from broken pieces. "I think it already came true, sweetheart." That night, after the children were asleep, Michael stood in his office. On his desk was a framed photo of Sophia holding the quadruplets in the hospital. Next to it, a new photo from today. All 6 of them on the blanket, wind-blown and laughing and present. He touched Sophia's photo gently. "Thank you," he whispered, "for Clara, for showing me the way back." He understood now. Finally understood what Sophia had been trying to tell him in that recording. Clara didn't come to replace her. She came to lead him back to life, back to presence, back to his children, back to himself. Love wasn't about control. It wasn't about building walls to keep the pain out. It wasn't about having the perfect plan or the right strategies. Love was showing up, being there on the floor in the mess, holding small hands, singing off-key, reading the same book 17 times, letting yourself be needed even when it scared you. It was saying, "I'm here with your whole heart, not just your wallet, not just your schedule, your whole self." That's what Sophia had always known. That's what Clara had shown him, and that's what he was finally learning to do. Upstairs, the house breathed with the sound of 4 children dreaming, safe, loved, whole. The sound wasn't silence anymore. It was life, real, messy, beautiful life. And Michael wasn't watching it from a distance anymore, wasn't managing it from behind closed doors. He was in it, fully, completely, beautifully in it, the way it was always meant to be.